Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is Hutchinson William from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert G. Mackey. Hutchinson William. Of all the Masonic writers of the 18th century, there was no one who did more to elevate the spirit and character of the institution than William Hutchinson of Barnard Castle, in the county of Durham, England. To him are we indebted for the first philosophical explanation of the symbolism of the order, and his spirit of Masonry still remains a priceless boon to the Masonic student. Hutchinson was born in 1732 and died April 7, 1814, at the ripe age of 82 years. He was by profession a solicitor, but such was his literary industry that a very extensive practice did not preclude his devotion to more liberal studies. He published several works of fiction which at the time were favorably received. His first contribution to literature was The Hermitage, a British story, which was published in 1772. This was followed in 1773 by a descriptive work entitled An Excursion to the Lakes of Westmoreland and Cumberland. In 1775, he published The Doubtful Marriage, and in 1776, A Week in a Cottage and a Romance, after the fashion of the Castle of Otranto. In 1778, he commenced as a dramatic writer. And besides two tragedies, Pygmalion, King of Tyre, and The Tyrant of Onia, which were never acted, he also wrote The Princess of Zanfara, which was successfully performed at several of the provincial theatres. Hutchinson subsequently devoted himself to archaeological studies and became a prominent member of the Royal Society of Antiquaries. His labours in this direction were such as to win for him from Nichols the title of an industrious antiquary. He published in 1776 A View of Northumberland in 2 volumes, in 1785, 1787, and 1794, 3 consecutive quarto volumes of the History and Antiquities of the County Palatinate of Durham, and in 1794, in 2 quarto volumes, A History of Cumberland, works which are still referred to by scholars as containing valuable information on the subjects of which they treat, and are an evidence of the learning and industry of the author. But it is as a Masonic writer that Hutchinson has acquired the most lasting reputation, and his labors as such have made his name a household word in the order. He was for some years the master of Barnard Castle Lodge, where he sought to instruct the members by the composition and delivery of a series of lectures and charges, which were so far superior to those then in use as to attract crowds of visitors from neighboring lodges to hear him and to profit by his instructions. Some of these were from time to time printed, and won so much admiration from the craft that he was requested to make a selection and publish them in a permanent form. Accordingly, he applied in 1774 for permission to publish to the Grand Lodge, which then assumed to be a rigid censor of the Masonic press, and having obtained it, he gave to the Masonic world the first edition of his now celebrated treatise entitled The Spirit of Masonry, in moral and elucidatory lectures. But the latter part of the title was omitted in all the subsequent editions. The sanction for its publication, prefixed to the first edition, has an almost supercilious sound when we compare the reputation of the work, which at once created a revolution in Masonic literature, with that of those who gave the sanction and whose names are preserved only by the official titles which were affixed to them. The sanction is in these words: whereas Brother William Hutchinson has compiled a book entitled The Spirit of Masonry, and has requested our sanction for the publication circumflex thereof. We, having perused the said book and finding it will be of use to this society, do recommend the same. This approval is signed by the Grand Master and his deputy, also by the Grand Wardens and the Grand Treasurer and Secretary. But their judgment, though tamely expressed, was not amiss. A century has since shown that the Book of Hutchinson has really been of use to the society. It opened new thoughts on the symbolism and philosophy of Freemasonry, which, worked out by subsequent writers, have given to Freemasonry the high rank it now holds, and has elevated it from a convivial association, such as it was in the beginning of the 18th century, to that school of religious philosophy which it now is. To the suggestions of Hutchinson, Hemming undoubtedly owed that noble definition that Freemasonry was a science of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. The first edition of The Spirit of Masonry was published in 1775. The second in 1795, the third in 1802, the fourth in 1813, the fifth in 1814, and the sixth in 1815, all except the last in the lifetime of the author. Several subsequent editions have been published both in the United States and in Great Britain. In 1780, it was translated into German and published at Berlin under the title of Der Geist der Freimaurerei in Moralischen und Erläuternden Vorträgen. Of this great work, the craft appear to have had but one opinion. It was received on its first appearance with enthusiasm, and its popularity among Masonic scholars has never decreased. Dr. Oliver says of it, "It was the first efficient attempt to explain in a rational and scientific manner the true philosophy of the order. Dr. Anderson and the writer of the Gloucester Sermon indicated the mind, Calcott opened it, and Hutchinson worked it." In this book, he gives to the science its proper value. After explaining his design, he enters copiously on the rites, ceremonies, and institutions of ancient nations. Then he dilates on the lodge with its ornaments, furniture, and jewels, the building of the temple, geometry, and after explaining the third degree with a minuteness which is highly gratifying, he expatiates on secrecy, charity, and brotherly love, and sets at rest all the vague conjectures of cowans and unbelievers by a description of the occupations of masons and a masterly defense of our peculiar rites and ceremonies. The peculiar theory of Hutchinson in reference to the symbolic design of Freemasonry is set forth more particularly in his 9th lecture, entitled The Master Mason's Order. His doctrine was that the lost word was typical of the lost religious purity which had been occasioned by the corruptions of the Jewish faith. The piety which had planted the temple at Jerusalem had been expunged, and the reverence and adoration due to God had been buried in the filth and rubbish of the world, so that it might well be said that the guide to heaven was lost and the master of the works of righteousness was smitten. In the same way, he extends the symbolism. True religion, he says, was fled. Those who sought her through the wisdom of the ancients were not able to raise her. She eluded the grasp, and their polluted hands were stretched forth in vain for her restoration. Those who sought her by the old law were frustrated, for death had stepped between and corruption defiled the embrace. Hence the Hutchinsonian theory is that the third degree of Freemasonry symbolizes the new law of Christ, taking the place of the old law of Judaism, which had become dead and corrupt. With him, Hiram or Huram is only the Greek Huramen, meaning I have found it, and acacia from the same Greek signifies freedom from sin, and thus the Master Mason represents a man under the Christian doctrine saved from the grave of iniquity and raised to the faith of salvation. Some of Hutchinson's etymologies are unquestionably inadmissible, as when he derives Tubal Cain from a corruption of the Greek, Tombonkio, I prepare my sepulchre, and when he translates the substitute word as meaning I ardently wish for life. But fanciful etymologies are the besetting sin of all antiquaries. So his theory of the exclusive Christian application of the third degree will not be received as the dogma of the present day. But such was the universally recognized theory of all his contemporaries. Still, in his enlarged and elevated views of the symbolism and philosophy of Freemasonry as a great moral and religious science, he was immeasurably in advance of his age. In his private life, Hutchinson was greatly respected for his cultivated mind and extensive literary acquirements, while the suavity of his manners and the generosity of his disposition secured the admiration of all who knew him. He had been long married to an estimable woman, whose death was followed in only 2 days by his own, and they were both interred in the same grave. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.